The other kind of objection against contemporary fashionable clothes came from the regard of health, and there were some people also among the sections of the society who could afford to have new fashionable clothes made. They had the money, they had the means, they didn't choose to wear them because they believed that these clothes were not healthy. Also, the practicality was mentioned here, but it's more about the health really. So it's a good moment to mention the Rational Dress Society, which was formed in 1881 in London. This was one of the social movements that were quite popular at this time. There were quite a lot of different social causes, including the campaigns for political rights for women. But this one, the Rational Dress Society, was aiming at reforming the fashions on the grounds of practicality and health. The society was formed by some society ladies. The founders were Viscountess Hayberton and Mrs. King. So they were rich ladies, and they had all the means to wear fashionable clothes, but they believed it was not a good idea. So one thing that they objected to was the same thing that was raised by Mrs. Bloomer. They believed that the clothes, especially the traditional way of wearing multiple petticoats, was too heavy and unpractical. But in the 80s, nobody really did that anymore. And even Mrs. Bloomer apparently found the crinoline cage quite comfortable compared to the weight of the multiple petticoats. But they drew the attention, the Rational Dress Society drew the attention to the corsets. So the restrictive corsetry, and especially the practice of tight lacing, and the immobility caused by fashions of the day, which in the 1880s would be those late Victorian neoclassicism, the so-called natural form, or the neoclassical dresses, which were narrow but corseted. This is between the first and the second bustle. So these clothes were supposed to be a bit more practical than the bustle dresses, but they were still quite restrictive. Also, they believed that no woman should have to wear more than 7 pounds of underwear. Actually, with the multiple petticoats and the crinoline frames and the bustles and all that, sometimes a fashionable woman had to wear much more. Some said that around 14 pounds of undergarments could be worn. So it's like 7 kilograms. So they wanted to reduce it by half. So the bulky underwear with multiple layers and those bulky dress improvers were something they did not like. What also started to come to attention of the general public was the way that modern corsets with metal ribs and those metal rimmed eyelets that allowed for tight lacing could actually deform the body. So rather than, let's say, emphasize the natural attractiveness of the female body, they shaped it in a way that increasing numbers of medical doctors believed to be unhealthy. And yes, it's Watson getting into a box. And the invention of the X-rays revealed that even the bone structure of the rib cage could be altered permanently if a woman wore tight-laced corsets from an early age, especially around the age of puberty, before her bone structure was fully developed. They could actually permanently change the shape of the bones, and also the natural organs, the lungs, the liver, the intestines would be squeezed and relocated inside the bodies, and it was increasingly believed that that this was unhealthy. And here we have an image illustrating this danger. So the positioning of the organs of the body in an uncorseted woman and in a corseted woman. And also an interesting cartoon from Punch again, in which a lady wearing a corseted dress, a version of a crinoline dress probably, but we can assume that she also has a very small waist, is compared to the Chinese practice of binding the feet of ladies from noble families, because the Chinese idea was that a woman should have very small feet. You probably heard about it. This was a practice that was very painful and practically immobilized the women whose feet were bound in childhood. It also resulted in permanent mutilation of the bone structure of the feet of these ladies. And here we have a woman who is described as, "This is the wife of a nobleman in full dress. It will be seen that the barbarian English have no notion whatever of the golden lilies." The golden lilies was the Chinese term for those tiny bound feet of the Chinese noblewomen. And here we have a lady wearing a crinoline, some sort of Chinese-looking hat to that. But the point is that perhaps to other cultures, like the Chinese, the practice of artificially reducing the size of the waist would be comparable to the practice of artificially, cruelly and painfully reducing the size of women's feet. If you think about it, it's just a different part of the body that has changed, and they got a point here. It's unnatural, and it's dictated by the fashions of a particular culture, perhaps to the detriment of the women who follow this fashion. Another example of dress reform caused by medical opinions and the belief surrounding the medical opinions of this period is the case of Dr. Gustav Jäger. This is also from the 1880s. Dr. Gustav Jäger was a German professor of zoology and physiology at the University of Stuttgart, and he had a theory. He believed it was purely scientific. Of course, now we know, well, it's not proven at least. But if you are interested in the history of medicine in the 19th century, there were quite a lot of ideas and theories that have been disproved later on, so this is one of them. Dr. Jäger believed that it was unhealthy to wear anything but the animal fabrics. so animal fibers, next to a person's skin. So he called it the hygienic dress movement, the hygienic dress. So the idea was to wear only the kinds of fabrics that were made from animals and not plants, next to your naked skin. So mostly wool. Silk would also be an option, but wool as compared to linen or cotton. Dr. Jaeger believed that wool is the most healthy fabric, so he wanted everyone to use wool fibers for any occasions, and especially the occasions when the fabric was in direct contact with the skin. So we have the woolen underwear, the woolen corsets, right down to bed sheets. So the bed sheets and generally bed linen, should not be bed linen but bed wool. The ideas were promoted as scientific, although, well, we now know they were not really founded in any science. And everybody in the Victorian world was fascinated by science. Science was the sign of modernity. If you followed scientific advice, it showed you were modern, educated, civilized, rational. So this was a very rational argument for the dress reform, and these ideas were accepted by relatively wide sections of the society. So there was a fashion for the hygienic dress for a while, and here we have two press advertisements of Dr. Jaeger's dresses, also hygienic or sanitary dresses. So we have pure wool belted corset, for example, so a corset using this woolen fabric, and another advertisement for clothes, like here the outer clothing, and also sanitary woolen underclothing for ladies and children. So this was a fashion that grew from the fascination of science, of modernity, and yeah, so some manufacturers answered that and started producing a whole range of similar garments in different colors, and this was something that was fashionable for a while, in mid-80s mostly, but now we know it was not really the real science. So let's now move on to the third